document slides across a polished table. 5 businessmen sit in a private room at the most expensive hotel in Paris. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, the kind of room where government makes deals. The man at the head of the table adjusts his cufflinks. He's calm, rehearsed, his suit is tailored. Italian probably. Everything about him screams power. "Gentlemen," he says, "what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room." He pauses, looks each of them in the eye. "The government is selling it, 7,000 tons of iron, and I need one of you to haul it away." One of them does. He pays $250,000. And by the time he realizes what happened, he doesn't call the police. He can't, because admitting what he tried to buy would absolutely ruin him. You'd think you'd never fall for something like this, but the trick this man used, it is the same psychological exploit behind every scam you've ever ignored in your inbox, every invest opportunity a friend has sent you, every deal that seemed too perfect. His name was Victor Lustig, and he didn't sell scrap material. He sold the Eiffel Tower. And then he came back and sold it again. He was born in 1890 in what's now the Czech Republic, spoke 5 languages fluently, English, French, German, Italian, and Czech, had a face that people just trusted. By the time Lustig was in his 20s, he was running cons across Europe under at least 45 different names. And his favorite alias was Count Victor Lustig, because when you call yourself a count, well, people treat you like one. Lustig wasn't just a liar. He was a student of human behavior. He could walk into a room, read every person in it within minutes, and become exactly who they needed him to be. If you were rich, he was richer. If you were powerful, he had connections you didn't. If you were insecure, he would make you feel like the most important person in the world. He dressed impeccably, stayed in the best hotels, and never, ever, ever broke character. When he walked into a room, you didn't question who he was. You wondered why he was even bothering talking to you. He once sat across from Al Capone, yes, that Al Capone, and convinced him to invest $50,000 in a stock deal. 2 months later, Lustig walked back into Al Capone's office. He handed the money back and said the deal fell through. Al Capone was so impressed by his honesty that he gave Lustig $5,000 as a gift, a thank you for being trustworthy. But that was the con, the whole thing. The $5,000 was always the payday. Lustig never intended to invest a single cent. He just needed Capone to think he tried. But in the spring of 1925, Lustig was in Paris, and he was about to attempt something that would make the Capone con like pocket change. He's reading a newspaper one morning in a Parisian cafe. There's an article about the Eiffel Tower, about the maintenance costs, the rusting iron, the public debate over whether to finally tear it down. Now, you have to understand something about the Eiffel Tower in 1925. A lot of Parisians hated it. It was built for the 1889 World's Fair as a temporary structure. It was supposed to come down after 20 years, but 36 years later, it was still standing, still rusting, and still draining the city's budget. Like actual critics called it an iron monstrosity. Artists wrote petitions demanding it to be removed. And for decades, the tower's future was genuinely uncertain. So when Lustig read that article about the repair costs, about how the city might finally demolish it, the idea wasn't that absurd. It was almost plausible. Most people read that article and turn the page. Lustig read it and saw an opportunity. What if the government actually was tearing it down? What if they needed someone to buy 7,000 tons of scrap iron? And what if he was the government official in charge of the sale? So he recruited an accomplice, a forger named Dapper Dan Collins. And together, they created a fake government letterhead for the Ministère de Poste et Télégraphe. Official seals, ministry stamps, the forgeries were actually flawless. Then Lustig booked a suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most prestigious hotels in Paris, right at the Place de la Concorde. Because if you're pretending to be a high-ranking government official, you don't meet people at a cafe. You meet them somewhere that confirms everything they already believe about you. Next came the most important step, choosing the targets. And he didn't pick random businessmen. He researched scrap metal dealers across the region. He looked for men who were ambitious, hungry, and just a little bit on the outside looking in. Men who jump at a massive government contract. Men who had something to prove. He found 5 and sent each of them a letter on official ministry stationery, inviting them to a confidential meeting about a matter of national importance. Every detail was calibrated to make them feel special, chosen, like they were being trusted with something that most people would never even know about. The 5 dealers arrive at the Hôtel de Crillon. They're nervous, excited. They've never been invited to anything like this before. Whatever it is, it feels enormous. Lustig, posing as a deputy director general, escorts them to a private conference room. He closes the door. Gentlemen, the Eiffel Tower has become too expensive to maintain. The structure is deteriorating. The government has decided to sell it for scrap. This is politically sensitive. We cannot announce it publicly. We need to find a buyer first, handle the transaction quietly, and present it as a done deal. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, how did anyone fall for this? Think about it for a second. The tower was actually controversial. The government was really spending a fortune on repairs, and public opinion really was split. And this man had official documents, a suite at the finest hotel in Paris, and answers to every technical question they asked. Because he'd spent weeks preparing, memorizing government procedures, learning bureaucratic jargon, studying how ministry officials carried themselves, how they spoke. Lustig didn't just dress the part, he actually became the part. He knew the weight of the structure down to the ton, the market value of scrap iron, the maintenance cost down to the franc. He even took them to a guided tour of the Eiffel Tower. Oh my gosh, think about that, literally. He walked 5 businessmen around the base of the tower, pointing out rust, structural weaknesses, explaining demolition logistics. This was like a full production. The whole thing was theater. Lustig was the director and the lead actor and the only person who knew how the whole play ended. But through all of it, Lustig was watching, studying each man, and he'd already picked his primary target, André Poisson. Poisson was a scrap dealer from the provinces. He'd built a decent business, but he wasn't part of the Parisian establishment. He was very ambitious. Maybe a little insecure. Desperate to prove he belonged at the table with the big players, landing the biggest government scrap contract in French history, that would definitely change everything for him. And Lustig recognized that immediately. He'd seen that look 100 times before. The willingness to take a leap because the reward felt too big to walk away from. So after the tour, Lustig invited Poisson back to the hotel, alone, for a private meeting. And this is where Lustig deployed the single most brilliant move in the history of con artistry. He leaned forward. I want to be honest with you. I'm a government official, but I'm not paid what I deserve. This project, there's a lot of money involved, and in situations like these, there's traditionally a facilitation fee. He was asking for a bribe. Think about the psychology of that for a second. He's already running a scam to sell the Eiffel Tower that he doesn't own, And now he's layering a bribe on top of it. But that's exactly what made it work. Because what kind of scammer asks for a bribe? A real scammer wouldn't risk complicating the deal, but a corrupt government official, that is exactly what any corrupt government official would do. And in 1920s Paris, gracing palms was just how business got done. Poisson didn't even flinch. He paid the bribe, and then he paid for the Eiffel Tower, approximately 7,000 francs, so roughly $250,000 in today's money. Lustig provided contracts, documents, official-looking papers covered in stamps and seals. And then he and Dapper Dan got on a train to Vienna. By the time Poisson realized the truth, they were gone. But Poisson never reported it. He'd just been robbed of $250,000. And he said nothing. Imagine walking into a police station and saying, I tried to buy the Eiffel Tower from a man I never verified, whose office I never visited, whose credentials I never checked, and I paid him a bribe on top of it. Yeah, his reputation would be destroyed, his business finished, he'd be the laughingstock of Paris, maybe all of France. So Poisson stayed quiet, absorbed all the loss, and tried to pretend it never happened. And that silence, the shame, is what makes the Eiffel Tower scam so perfect. Lustig didn't just steal money, he created a situation where the victim couldn't fight back without humiliating himself. It is the same reason so many scam victims today never report what happened. The embarrassment is sometimes worse than the loss. And when Lustig realized no one was looking for him, he came back. 1 month later, same city, same scam, but different dealers. He checked into another luxury hotel, had Dapper Dan print fresh letterhead, sent new letters, ran the exact same con, same playbook, same hotel caliber, same tour of the tower. The only things that changed were the faces sitting across the table. This time though, it didn't go as smoothly. The second victim actually went to the police. Lustig caught wind that investigators were asking questions and fled to America before they could make an arrest. He was never charged for the Eiffel Tower scams. There was barely any physical evidence anyway. He'd vanished like smoke. In America, Lustig kept running cons because, of course, his most famous was the Romanian box, a small wooden device he claimed could print real currency. So he demonstrated, feeding in a genuine bill and producing what looked like a perfect copy. Then he'd sell the box for thousands of dollars. Of course, the box was loaded with pre-placed real bills, and the buyer would get 1, maybe 2 copies before realizing the machine produced nothing but blank paper. But by then, Lustig was in another city with another name. But you can only outrun the law for so long, right? In 1935, Lustig was arrested in New York, not for selling the Eiffel Tower, but for counterfeiting. He went from pretending to print money to actually printing it. He attempted a dramatic escape, climbing out of a window using a bedsheet rope. He managed to stay free for 27 days before agents tracked him down again, and he was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. He ended up in Alcatraz, the same prison that held Al Capone, the man Lustig had conned a decade earlier. Yeah. Victor Lustig died on March 11, 1947, in a prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri, from pneumonia. And on his death certificate under occupation, someone wrote a single word: salesman. Why did it work though? Why did André Poisson, a successful businessman at that, not an idiot, hand over $250,000 for something that wasn't for sale? Because he just wanted to believe, honestly. Poisson didn't get scammed because he was gullible. Maybe a little. But he got scammed mostly because he wanted to be the man who landed the deal of a lifetime. He wanted to have the prestige, the recognition, the proof that he'd finally made it. And Lustig saw that, read it on his face, built an entire performance around it. Lustig actually wrote down his principles, 10 commandments for con artists. They're like real, like in his FBI files. He wrote things like, be a patient listener, never look bored, never boast, just let your importance be quietly obvious, wait for the other person to reveal their political opinions, then agree with them. And I mean, these are not just con artist tricks, they're obviously just rules of charming people, of persuasion, of making someone trust you in 30 minutes 101. Lustig's commandments aren't in some like dusty archive. They circulate online, literally. Business influencers share them, sales trainers reference them, because stripped of their criminal context, they're basically instructions for building trust, which tells you something a little bit uncomfortable, about the little gap between persuasion and manipulation. So, could this exact scam happen today? Probably not. We have digital records, background checks, Google. You can't just show up at a hotel claiming to be a government official selling a landmark. But the psychology, that really hasn't changed in 100 years. Every Ponzi scheme, every limited time investment, they all work the same way. They find what you want and then they sell it to you. Someone calls pretending to be your bank. A stranger messages you about an exclusive opportunity. I mean, it's always the same architecture, the same authority, urgency, and the thing you want the most. Now, we all know this, it's obvious the Eiffel Tower still stands in Paris today, over 100 years after the man in a tailor's suit tried to sell it for scrap. But in the spring of 1925, for one brief moment, a man named André Poisson believed he owned it. And somewhere on a train heading east, Victor Lustig was counting his money and planning to do it all over again. He didn't just sell the Eiffel Tower, he sold a version of reality where André Poisson was somebody important enough to buy it. And that, more than the money, was probably the real con.